Well, it's noon. I want to go ahead and get started for those who are using this as the lunch break. So, Jeff, are you supposed to see yourself? No, it's a webinar, so you're not going to see yourself. You'll see my beautiful face, April Johnson with Preservation Durham, and then you have Chris Holaday. He's the author of the book Classic Restaurants of Durham. I don't know if you can see it because I have my focus filter on, but so he will talk to us today about this book, Classic Restaurants of Durham, and we will review, but just talk about Durham culture. So if you're anything like me, I love traveling, and when I go out of the country, I especially love food. Food and architecture and music and dancing and things of that sort. So I like to engulf myself in the culture, but I believe that culture is everywhere. And so one of the things I liked about this book is that he kind of talks about how Durham grew, but in looking at it from the lens of food. So he will make a presentation today and talk about Durham's classic restaurants and how Durham's culture developed in that way. We will have questions at the end. So if you have questions, we'll wait to hold off at the end, but please do use the question and answer, chat amongst each other. Again, my name is April Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Preservation Durham. We are your nonprofit historic preservation organization right here in Durham County. So our mission is to advocate, to provide education and other types of resources as it relates to protecting Durham's historic resources. And let's see here. I have an introductory paragraph for Chris Holaday. Okay, so Chris Holaday is a writer and photographer based in Durham, North Carolina. He's a native of Dallas and a lifelong Rangers fan. He discovered a love for minor league baseball while a student at the University of North Carolina. His first book, Professional Baseball in North Carolina, won the 1999 Sporting News SABR Baseball Research Award. In the years since, he has written several other books and was co-author with Mark Presswood of Baseball in Dallas and Baseball in Fort Worth. His most recent books are The Tobacco State League, Classic Restaurants of Durham, and a cookbook titled Southern Breads, which is surprisingly unrelated to baseball. So Chris, how did you mix this baseball and food? Where did this combination come from?
It started, well, I've always been interested in food. And like you were saying, I've always been interested in the culture that goes with food. And I like the architecture part of it too. And I'll get to that in my photos. But I was always a marketing writer. I worked for a couple different companies writing, stuff promoting businesses and things. So I was working at Southern Season in Chapel Hill, the big gourmet retailer, as their copywriter and did photography for them. But while I was there, I met the woman who was the head of the cooking school. Her name was Marilyn Markle. And so she had these great recipes, and I just kept thinking it'd make a great little cookbook. And she specialized in bread. And so we talked, and one thing led to another. We proposed this book to a publisher called Southern Breads. And that's how I started the relationship with the publisher that did the restaurant books. And so in the meantime, after I left Southern Season, I went back to graduate school to get a master's in history. I went to NC Central, and we had one class that was in conjunction with UNC. And so we went to Wilson Library at UNC, talked about the archives. And in that class, I met Patrick Cullom, who was the co-author of this book, and he's a photo archivist. And a lot of his job is dealing with the collection of Durham Herald, which is like 2 million negatives that were donated from the Durham Herald to Wilson Library. And it's everything in Durham history, I think dating back to the 40s up through maybe 2003, perhaps. But anyway, he was sort of an expert on these negatives. And right at that same time, the publisher of the cookbook, History Press in Charleston, they contacted me and asked if I knew anyone who'd be interested in doing a restaurant history book. They wanted to do one Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, all combined. And I was like, first of all, that's way too big. They're all very different cities. But they're trying to promote a whole series of these books around the country, different cities. I think they sent me a sample book to look at from like Louisville, Kentucky. So they're trying to just pick different places. And so they just asked if I knew anyone who'd be interested. And the more I thought about it, I was like, that would be really fun. I mean, I've always been interested in restaurants, worked in restaurants. So I'd met Patrick in my class who, was an expert in Durham photographs. And so we started talking, and that sort of led to this book. We decided just to go ahead and do it ourselves. And we did this book. And then right after it, we did a book on Chapel Hill and in Orange County, which sort of included Hillsborough and Carrboro, just sort of go together. And it was really fun. I mean, we learned a lot, both of us, just about, the cities and the histories and restaurants I'd heard about, before my time, but I learned more about them. And it was really a fun project, and it's fun talking to people. That's one thing about restaurants. I always like hearing people's memories about what restaurants meant to them. Whether it was like their first date or a graduation meal or whatever. Restaurants are so important in culture, not just the food, but just the camaraderie that happens with them. And so, this book, for today, I put together a little slideshow. I picked out, some restaurants that were very interesting in the city, and most all of them are gone now. I think everyone I picked is gone. And so I've tried to show an old picture and what's in that spot now, just to show what kind of was lost architecturally or culturally or whatever. And so, but Durham has such a really interesting history because, it wasn't really, now it's sort of thought of as a culinary destination because there's so many great restaurants here that serve all different types of foods. But, up until really the 80s, that was not the case, but it changed so much. So if you're ready, April, I can go ahead and share my screen and sort of show this slideshow if you like.
Yes, I'm ready. And while you get that pulled up, I did have one more question before you start your presentation. What do you think? Because you're right. I think preservation it's about places and what makes and how people feel about it and what makes it special. Because if it doesn't connect to people, they're not going to want to preserve the place and preserve its story and what it means. And so, but what did you see between your books and for the Hillsborough and Chapel Hill area and Raleigh area? Did you notice a distinct difference in the three communities?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done anything with Raleigh. I don't know if we will, but Chapel Hill obviously was all focused around the university. And, Carrboro is a little different because it was more of a mill town originally. Now it's sort of part of the university too. And Hillsborough has its own little thing. But as far as Durham was really three separate parts, food-wise, kind of. You had the Duke students had their areas. Then you had Hayti in that area. They had their own restaurants. And then you had sort of more like the tobacco areas, the tobacco warehouses and the textile mills. They had their own sort of places. So there were sort of three separate places of Durham, up until probably the 70s. Then they all started merging together, So that was the main thing about Durham. They were just kind of similar but separate. The food was very similar. Black or white, everyone kind of ate the same food in Durham up until probably the 70s or 80s. It was barbecue and fried chicken and Brunswick stew and just your basic Southern fare. That's what everyone ate. So there were a few interesting occurrences in Durham restaurants that sort of brought new flavors to town, and that's very interesting. And that's Durham and Chapel Hill both. That's really an interesting story. Like the first restaurants to bring different experiences food-wise to people. And even in both cities, it's interesting, some of the big restaurant families were Greek. And even though they had a Greek heritage, they didn't serve Greek food because that's not what the people wanted, really. That was too exotic for a lot of people up until, probably the 80s. They just served regular diner food. And I always thought that was very interesting. So, but it's really changed now. I mean, Orange County and Durham County, there's so many, you can eat everything you want, and you can eat Mongolian food, you can eat Ethiopian food. I mean, you couldn't have done that even just 15 years ago, probably. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction and mini interview. Go ahead. You can go now. Go ahead now and pull up your presentation.
All
And I'm pretty
right.
sure people are ready to hear you talk.
All right. So this is the cover of the book. I'll just start with that. And what I was kind of going to say about this is everything I just said about, how much Durham has changed. And, it's as you go through this book, or as I go through the slideshow, you'll see just some of the different pictures. And I broke up the book into sections. So there's a section on, I even did a little chapter on hot dogs, because hot dogs, it seems like, are always very important to people. It's a very simple food, but very popular. And also did a section on dining in hotels, because hotels were a great place to eat for people. Even in the Hayti section, the Biltmore Hotel, which is very popular, and then the Washington Duke, the original one downtown, they all had restaurants in them. And then all the tobacco industry, all the warehouses had little cafes in them. And there's some great pictures in the cafes, little dining places people would eat at while they were waiting to sell their tobacco. So, and then one of the main things we tried to focus on was restaurants that were around for 20 years. Either they're still around after 20 years or they existed for 20 years. And so that's sort of the featured restaurants in the book. So I'll just go through a few of them and talk a little bit about them. And let's see. So the first one, there's sort of an alphabetical order. And so this was called A.B. Morris Cafeteria. And this was right next to American Tobacco. And it was very popular starting probably in the 40s, just a little brick building, sort of attached to a house, which is kind of strange. But it was very popular. Even Duke students used to go here, even though it was not really in the Duke territory. It was a cheap place to eat. In the 60s, this building was torn down and replaced by a more modern looking, kind of boring cafeteria. It was called Nance Cafeteria. And the Nance family was involved in a lot of restaurants in Durham. They owned a real famous seafood place out on Maureen Road, but that family had many restaurants. But anyway, this site, everyone will recognize now, was right here. You can see in this right here, the triangle shaped building, that was the cafeteria. And this right now is pretty much the left field stands of the ballpark. So this whole area is gone now, and that's the baseball stadium right here. And you can see my cursor, can't you, when I move my finger? Okay. And so, it's talk about preservation. It's great that all this was preserved, all of American Tobacco, but, everything over here was changed. And, one of the, Durham's infamous urban renewal project that destroyed so much of the city with Durham Freeway. You think about Hayti, which is over here to the left a little ways, but right here, it looks like there was another whole tobacco building, because the freeway runs right there now. So that was all gone. And all these houses were through here were gone too. So let's see what else we got. Oh, talking about hot dogs. This was an Amos and Andes, and it was a really famous hot dog place. Everyone went there. Every kid knew it. Adults went there for lunch. They actually served beer there, which I thought was kind of interesting. But this was a really popular place. It was on a Chapel Hill Street downtown. And later it moved to another location in downtown. And then it moved out to 55, 54 area in the 70s. But this site right now, which there were several businesses all right here, is now this. It's the Marriott Hotel. I mean, all that whole block was torn down for the hotel and the convention center. So big changes right there on that street. So I got all these pictures from Google Earth. I just kind of went on there to see, just so I could show what was in these locations now. Another big one for Duke students was Annamaria's Pizza, and talking about, places that brought different sort of flavors to town. Annamaria served the first pizza in Durham, and that was in the late 50s, which doesn't even really seem that long ago for that kind of food. But pizza was very exotic in 1958 in Annamaria's when they served it. And the woman who owned it, she was Italian, and she was actually from New Jersey, I think. So she had experience cooking pizza, but when she came down here, she didn't. And so, but then one of the football quarterback at Duke, Sonny Jurgensen, who later went on to play in the NFL, he knew she cooked Italian food, and he was from up north, I believe, maybe. Anyway, he wanted pizza, so he talked her into it. She made it, and other students ate it, and it turned into, a popular restaurant. And it finally shut down in the 80s. I think 86 it finally closed. But for, over 25 years, it was a very popular place, hangout for Duke students. And that location now is a parking lot, unfortunately. It had been a little house, I think, that had been turned into a restaurant. But this is Main Street right over here. This is Albemarle Street. So, but it's just a nondescript little parking lot, but so many Duke students had a good time right there.
Oh, Tom Miller just made a comment. He said that it was originally in Walltown. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah, it was in
But
their
it had-
house. It was in the woman and her husband. It was in their house. And then they finally moved out of there. They were just selling pizza in their kitchen, I think, a little setup thing. But then they opened that place.
Yeah, Tom said it was a zoning violation, I bet.
And this was the Blue Light Grill. This was a popular place starting in the late 40s. And this was right on Irwin Road, kind of where it turns into 9th Street. Everyone probably knows this location. It was a popular restaurant, but then later in the 70s, it became more of a convenience store. And then it became a popular beer store that specialized just in beer. But it started as a restaurant for many years, and it was a drive-in restaurant. So over here on the left, there were places where the waiters would actually come out to your car. But it was very popular. And I tried to find a picture of what this is now, but Google Earth hasn't even kept up with what's there. But it's like a huge, sort of a high-end apartment building there now, which is just sprung up right between Durham Freeway and the train tracks. So I'm sure you all know where I'm talking about. But it's just amazing to think that changed so quickly right there. This was, I didn't have an actual picture of Dillard barbecue, but Dillard was very popular. It started in the early 50s. It was sort of the rival of a Bullock's, but Dillard's was sort of for the Black customers, and it was very popular. And later they served barbecue at the Bulls games for years. And Sam Dillard, he was kind of a character. This ad came out in the early 70s, I believe. And he was dressed like Colonel Sanders in a white suit with a string tie. And it's a great ad. It's like, Sam Dillard ain't no colonel, but he sure makes chicken taste good. Well, Colonel Sanders didn't really appreciate that, being mocked like that. So I think he sent him a cease and desist letter, not to run this ad. So, however, he ran a follow-up ad that showed Sam Dillard dressed normally with his white suit folded up, sitting next to him. And it said something like, "The colonel may have taken my suit, but I still make chicken taste good." So he was very popular in Durham, and his place was on Fayetteville Street. And he passed away in the late 90s, but his daughter, Wilma Dillard, ran it up until around 2011. I think the family just decided to retire. And now the site of Dillard's is a family fare convenience store on Fayetteville Street, unfortunately. But it was one of the most famous barbecue restaurants in the state, probably for a long time. Another restaurant in the Hayti area, which was very prominent, was the Donut Shop. And this was an ad that was sort of appealing to NC Central, which was called NC College at that time, just to promote it was a diner specialized in donuts, and they had a conference room, sort of the Jade Room. So they call it the South's finest eating establishment. That's kind of a grandiose claim, but it was a popular place, and it was right on Pettigrew Street. And this was another picture of the interior with their jukebox, and it looks like it was a pretty neat place. Unfortunately, that was one of the businesses that sort of fell apart after urban renewal when the highway went through. And this is a Pettigrew Street now, and this is the Venable Tobacco Building right here and here. And the restaurant strip was right here across the front on Pettigrew. And the Biltmore Hotel was down here to the left, which was, a big place for Black travelers to stay. It was a really nice hotel for a long time. But all this area went into decline after urban renewal, and it was finally just torn down. And the only thing sort of remaining in that little strip is the old tobacco building. And I actually used to work right here in this back part. I worked for a coffee roasting company that a lot of our business was supplying restaurants. And so we started in Carborough. And when I was in school at UNC, I worked there part-time as a delivery driver. And that was a great introduction to restaurants because I learned all the different restaurants in the area. I had a delivery route that took me, through Chapel Hill, through Durham to Raleigh and then back just, once a week. I did that route. And so I went to all these great restaurants, even though some of them I never ate at because I was a poor college student, but I went in the kitchen of many of them and knew where they were and knew about them. And so that was my sort of first introduction to restaurants in this area. But in the early 90s, we moved from Carborough to this old, which was a really kind of a decrepit building at the time, but it was just sort of empty, but it was great for, smoky tobacco roaster to set up in there. But at that time, there were all these old ruins sort of out here in the parking lot, which was gravel. And I didn't know the history of Hayti at that time. I didn't know what had happened, why there were, all these buildings that were gone now, but there was nothing in that area. It was really interesting. And it's changed so much over there now.
Oh yeah, now some new construction is being built.
Yeah, there's a lot of new construction over there. So this was a famous cafeteria restaurant. It was called Harvey's, which was on Main Street. And it was an interesting place because it was very popular and it was apparently huge. They had a big upstairs banquet room and it was popular. I like the little menu up here. The prices were kind of funny. But, Harvey's was a very unfortunate example of segregation in the 60s. It started probably in the 40s, I think. But, it was just the front-facing view everyone had was the white people, but it was actually the black people who ran the place. And this ad was really interesting because they promoted their black chef. But however, the owner of the place was infamously segregationist, and when there were protests over restaurant seating in the early 60s, he supposedly stood on the front porch with a shotgun to keep people away from his cafeteria. However, Durham had a really progressive mayor in the early 60s called Wentz Gerberick, and he was trying to put together a group of people who would, help to integrate restaurants and to move forward with all that. And so he thought if he could turn Harvey Rape, who owned the cafeteria, into integrating his restaurant, that, he could change anyone's mind. And he did. He talked him into it. And so finally, Harvey Rape, came around and integrated his restaurant. But for a long time, it was, a very segregated place. But I think it finally shut down in the 70s after he passed away. But it was a very popular place for a long time, and it was big. That building now is right here. This is a Mangum, I think. Right here is Mangum and Maine. And this was, I think this building was built for Duke Power in the 70s. Then it became something else. I'm not even sure what it is now. But again, that was another whole block that was torn down for very strange 70s architecture. And a really popular Duke student hangout was the Ivy Room. And it was on West Main Street. And it was it brought people a little bit of sort of New York to it because it had sort of a delicatessen to it, which was kind of strange in this area. Like if you look at this little list over here, kosher corned beef, Romanian pastrami, just different sort of stuff. And this was the owner here. His name was Percy Poole. And he also had sort of a gift shop in there where they sold beer and wine, things you couldn't find in your regular grocery store, sort of more European products maybe. So there was a gift store, then there was a restaurant next door, then upstairs what they called the Continental Room, which was sort of a bar. And so it was very popular for generations of Duke students, probably from the 40s up until the late 70s when it finally closed. So, and this was an interesting thing. I'd never really heard of this before, this Chicken in the Rough. If you can see on this little ad, it was sort of a franchise opportunity to serve chicken this one particular way. It came packaged like fried chicken with potatoes and in a certain container. And I had never heard of it. It's sort of like Kentucky Fried Chicken, but it wasn't a whole restaurant. You just served this one dish that way, but it was very interesting. So this is where the Ivy Room was, and the building is still there. This is one of the only ones that's I'm showing that the building is actually still there. And this is Albemarle Street. So Annamaria's was back here in the back, somewhere down here. And this building has been renovated, but fortunately it's all still there, right on West Main Street. And this on the right is the Federal, which is a really good restaurant now, but if anyone remembers, this was called the Subway for a long time. I think probably from the 70s up till the 90s. Subway was a really popular place just to get takeout subs, and it actually kept the chain Subway from using their name when they came into this area, because the Subway here had already been established and had rights to that name until they finally bought it from the Durham restaurant. And I think Federal opened in around 2005, maybe, so it's been there a long time too. So this was an interesting place. This was on Mangum, I think, unless I'm getting the streets confused. But this is right behind the Crest building. And this was called Lincoln Cafe. And this was owned by the Galifianakis family. Talking about, I mentioned earlier, a lot of Greek families own diners. This was one. And the Galifianakis family later produced Nick Galifianakis, who was a congressman from Durham and for a long time, and very prominent person. And then, but they were around for a long time. And this restaurant, I think it opened in the 40s, and it lasted up until, this was sort of another victim of urban renewal. They just sort of tore down that whole strip behind this towards the train track. This was an interesting restaurant too, because it sort of had a Black clientele, even though it was run by a Greek family. I don't really know a whole lot about it, but it was an interesting place. And it was a neat building too. Unfortunately, it's gone. And right now it's just a little parking lot. At least the Crest building has been preserved, but here and all through here were buildings, and then the train tracks would be right to the left. So Little Acorn was a really popular place for a lot of people. It was right near the tobacco warehouses north of downtown. And so a lot of farmers, when they would come to town, Little Acorn was the place they would go and take their families. And it was just your basic barbecue Brunswick stew place, but it was big, and it was seen as sort of a fancier barbecue restaurant. And this was the sign for it. So they used to have fried chicken, steaks, and Brunswick stew. They had a big neon sign, and it was very popular, probably from the 40s. I think it probably closed in the early 70s. And now that building is, well, it kind of looks like the same building, but I don't think any of it's remaining. It was right here, and it's right there. This is on Rigsby Street. Now, Full Steam Brewery is right to the left here. But you can look right here you can see the two driveways that serve Little Acorn, and then the sidewalk that used to go up to it, and it was right there. But I mean, that was such a huge place, and now there's nothing left of it.
Tom Miller commented, he said it had moved to, at some point it moved to Guest Road.
Yeah, that was the son, the original owner. When he passed away, his son opened Little Acorn 2, which was up on Guest Road, in the 70s. So talking about, the first types of food that were not just your traditional Southern cuisine, the Oriental was one. It was the first, I think it was the first Chinese restaurant in Durham. It was the second in all of North Carolina, as far as I can tell. And it opened in 1938 on 116 East Parish Street. The only other Chinese restaurant that was older was one that opened in Charlotte a few years before this. But it served Chinese food and American food. They always made that clear they had American food for those who were not into taking a risk on exotic Chinese food. It's just so funny. There's so many Chinese restaurants now. It's so common. Everyone likes it. But back then it was very unusual. And it's funny because it was owned by Chinese people, cooked by Chinese people, but all of the wait staff were white women, just because it made the customers more comfortable. It was really odd, kind of. But now that address, there's nothing there. It's just the building was here, and I'm not exactly sure what happened to it, if it was a fire or what. But it's just a little parking lot right there on Parish Street.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. And so the Palms was another restaurant that was downtown on Chapel Hill Street. It was another one, again, run by a Greek family. but it was sort of just a diner, but it was sort of the seat of political power in Durham. Like all the judges and lawyers used to go there for lunches, and everyone who worked downtown and places, it was just the place to go. And I'm not exactly sure what year this postcard is from, but it says never closed for 19 years. And I think the Palms opened in the 30s, maybe even the late 20s. And it was there up until the late 70s. And I think I have a picture of a menu. Yeah, this is a menu from the 70s. And by that time they were serving, some Italian dishes. Chicken livers with spaghetti sauce. That's kind of an interesting one there. But they just served a little bit of everything, your basic Southern vegetables, fried seafood, steaks. But it was a super popular place. And right now they closed, I think, in maybe 78, 79, somewhere around there. But that site is right here, this little building right here. There's a Durham Hotel right there. And so
in that building now, I can't think.
I can't really figure out what the name of the business is. It's some kind of little shop. I'm not exactly sure. To the left of it is a photography gallery, and on the one more door down is that print shop. So, but right here, if you see, you can barely see on the ground in front of that. It still says the Palms in the.
I think I know. I want to say it's that art shop. If someone in the comments can confirm, but I think it's that art place. It's some type of art shop.
But if you look, there's still remnants of the original Palms, entryway there. So that was such a popular place, an important place for Durham, businesses and politics for so many years. And this was, some buildings, restaurants came and went. They weren't always restaurants. There were other things. But this address at 401 East Chapel Hill Street has been many, many restaurants over time. And I found this was a matchbook cover. And I think it's from the 40s. It was just called R&M Cafe at that time, barbecue place. And then I found another picture from the 60s. It was called the Center Luncheonette, same building. And today it's Rue Claire, which is a popular, nice restaurant. So it's just interesting. That little address has been a restaurant for many, many years. And there's been many, many restaurants, but it's always been one. So the Saddle and the Fox was a really popular sort of steakhouse place out on Hillsborough Road, going right towards 15501. And it was a place to go for Duke students, with big events. You would take your dates there if you wanted to impress them. It was sort of set up as it was named the Saddle and the Fox because the guy who owned it, he was a Duke alum, and his family had owned that land, and they actually had a horse farm around there and were into horses. So it had that horse theme in there and lots of sort of Western decor. And they also had an oyster bar in there. And if you look here on the left, that is a giant pile of oyster shells. They would just throw them out there in the front of the restaurant. But it was a really popular place from the 40s when it opened. I think it opened right after World War II, and it closed in the late 70s. And by the time I came to this area in the late 80s, it had been redone, and it was half steakhouse and called Italian Garden in the other half. It was sort of two restaurants in one space. It was kind of a strange setup. But that space now is O'Reilly Auto Parts. And this little area right here, this is LaSalle Street is right here somewhere too. And so Bullock's is still there, and that's over on the left. And then Tip Top Fish House was across the street, and that was a really popular seafood restaurant. So there were several big restaurants in this part of, I guess it was technically the western edge of Durham at the time. But Bullock's is still there, but the Fish House and then Saddle and the Fox are long gone. So with fast food restaurants, you don't really think of fast food restaurants as being unique to a city, and they're not, but they're still play an important role for people. People have memories of, getting their first hamburgers at a fast food restaurant. And this was a Hardee's on near Forest Hills. One of the first Hardee's. It opened in 1964. It was one of the first in the country. I mean, Hardee's started in, I think, Greenville and Rocky Mount, and then So this was probably in the first 10 that opened, and it was really interesting architecturally. And I'm not exactly sure when it closed. I think in the 70s. But that site now, the address isn't even really an address anymore. It was right where Duke Street comes into University Drive, and that turns into, I don't know, Forest Hill Shopping Center is right here across the street. So the Hardee's was right here somewhere, maybe where this building is. So I don't know, but it's just long gone. But that was just, it was a really interesting architecture. You just don't see that type of fast food business preserved.
And did you find out who the architect was for that one?
No, I never really looked, but yeah, that would be an interesting thing. And I don't know if Hardee's, that sort of leads into the next one here, but I don't know if Hardee's had a patented design for their buildings, but a couple places in Durham did. And one of them was a shrimp boat, which was on University Drive, not University Drive, on Chapel Hill Boulevard. And the other one was called Dinette, which was Dinette was sort of a chrome building with neon, your traditional diner, and they specialized in donuts, obviously. But it started in the 40s, and it was a chain based in Charlotte, just sort of a regional chain. And it opened on West Main Street in Durham. And then Shrimp Boats opened. It was a chain based in Georgia, another regional chain, just had several places all across the southeast. But both of these buildings were, patented buildings. So everyone was exactly the same. Wherever you went, you'd find the same Donut Dinette or the same Shrimp Boats. And so Donut Dinette is long gone. Let's see, it's here. It was just called, it's just not paper now. And I think this building was probably built in the 80s maybe, but it was this address. So Donut Dinette was right there. And right to the right, there's a building right over here that is the, was Ivy Room. So it was just right down from that. And then Shrimp Boats, the building is still there, and that is a Saltbox seafood joint, which is a really great place in Durham now. I mean, it's very popular, but at least that building has been preserved, and it's really a popular place today still. So I think that is the end of my slides, just to give you a little bit of the different types of food in Durham, different places, that some still there, some long gone. So, but it's really an interesting story.
Yeah, that was really fun to go through. And I like how Saltbox still maintain that seafood theme.
Yeah.
At Shrimp Boat.
Yeah, I printed out one of those the blueprints from the patent blueprints, and I gave it to Ricky Moore, who owns it. He wanted one to frame and hang up in there because it was just kind of a neat thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's in the book too. So
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. I welcome questions. Let's see. Oh, Joan Portman asked about Chicken Hut. Yes, Chicken Hut is in the book. He just went over a few of them, but you have to get the book to get more. Ooh,
Chicken Hut has been there a long time, and that's a very prominent place too.
Yeah.
There's so many. I mean, I only mentioned a few. There's so many with great stories, great people involved, great characters. So
yeah. The Hartman's,
Hartman's Steakhouse is another one. Yep.
That was in there as well. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Let's see what's going on in the chat room here. Let's see. Oh, Tom grew up here, so he remembers everything.
Yeah.
He said every Friday night it was expensive. I think he was talking about one of the must have been commenting on one of the restaurants. The Tip Top Fish House had chicken in the rough too.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
He was asking, was it the Lee family that ran the Moon?
That ran which one?
The Chinese.
Oh, the Oriental.
Chinese the Oriental.
I can't. I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
I think it was. I can't remember.
Okay. Let's see. Jennifer asked, wasn't the Jade Room actually the Green Candle restaurant?
It may have been. The Green Candle it started. Green Candle was one that actually survived urban renewal. It had been right there in Hayti, and it moved over onto Fayetteville Street. And Azola Allen was her name. She ran it for years and years. And it was a very small place, but I think it did start right there on Peggery Street, and then it moved over to a little strip mall. What's it called? Phoenix Plaza or something? I think.
Yeah, Phoenix Square.
Yeah, Phoenix Square. It moved over to there, but that's a restaurant that did actually survive. It moved around a couple times, but it lasted up until through the early 80s, I think.
Tom Miller asked, what impact did liquor by the drink have? When I was a kid, there were very few nighttime restaurants, but lots of lunch places.
It had a big impact. Yeah, especially it allowed places to, expand what they offered, and it just made it more, there was a lot of money involved in liquor by the drink. You could make more money, so it just allowed more people to experiment with the restaurants, to experiment with their menus, because the liquor money always was there. They could fall back on that. So I know in Chapel Hill, that was a huge thing, the liquor by the drink restaurants. I don't think, what year did that change? Like 77, 78, somewhere around then, I think, is when that happened. But that really was the first step to opening up to more variety in food, I think.
Mm-hmm. Andrew asked, what were the fanciest places to take a prom date or for other important occasions?
I mean, probably that one, the Saddle and the Fox, that big steakhouse place. That was really, if you look at old pictures, and there's some in the book of people wearing tuxedos and stuff, that was just the place to go. Other ones, I mean, later on, there were, by the 80s, there were, the ones we all know, like Magnolia Grill and places like that. But in the 70s, I would probably say Saddle and the Fox. And I talked to some Duke students, guys I knew who were around back then, and they said that was the place to go.
Amy asked, where did all the old photos and stories come from? Were they hard to find?
Yeah, some of them were. I mean, some of them came from some things. We went to Durham Public Library. A lot of them came, as I was saying before, Patrick, the co-author, he's a photo archivist. So he dug through what's at Wilson Library at UNC. A lot of the collection is from the Durham Herald photos, and there's just a bunch of negatives. And I don't think they've all been sorted through yet because there's so many, but they just cover a large part of the city's history, everything from Christmas parades to restaurant openings to car wrecks to everything. I mean, there was some photographer taking a picture of it. And there's a few other collections too that we resourced, and a few things came from just people that we met that had pictures that they had taken. So.
Yeah. And Tom mentioned that Hartman Steakhouse had ducks on the pond.
Yeah,
that was something nice.
That was a popular place, and that building is still there. I think the TROSA organization uses that building for something now, but it's still out there on is it on Gear Street or Club Boulevard? It's on Gear Street, I think, way out
Gear.
East.
Yeah. Oh, more questions? Hold on, let's see. Blythe asked, as of today, what is the longest running restaurant in Durham? Do you happen to know that?
It's Bullock's and Chicken Hut are pretty close together, I think. Both of them were early 50s, I think, and they're still around. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Karen asked, when did the Ivy Room go out of business? She says, I remember eating there in the early 80s and remember it as more of a luncheonette, popular with the L&M crowd. What's L&M? L&M crowd?
I'll have to look that up to give you a specific answer, but I'm curious now. 1985.
1985.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. And Andrew asked, did you uncover or put any recipes into the book? I don't think I did.
Actually, we did. We put one for the chili from Amos and Andes. We came across that recipe just in the little chapter we did on hot dogs. I thought that was just kind of fun to put that in there because everyone remembers that chili. So they had published that recipe in the newspaper, so it was out there. So.
All right, we got some chilies. We got some Amos and Andes chili recipe. Yeah. Jennifer asked, wasn't Primrose Jones the chef at Saddle and Fox? He was an African American from Walltown.
That is very possible. I don't.
Oh, Liggett Myers. Okay, thank you, Patty. I was like, what's Aaron in? Liggett Myers tobacco.
I do not know the question just asked about the chef, but that's a good one. There was a real famous host there named Walter Grandy, who was there for over 30 years. He was like the maitre d' forever, but that's the only name that I can think of that was associated with that.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. And Karen asked, in the American Tobacco campus, there is a little cafe in the front preserve. Did you know anything about it?
I tried to, there's actually a picture of that in the book, a picture I took myself. It's, I think it was just there for, the employees to, have a snack or something, that they just sort of preserved a little bit of the front entrance of it.
Yeah.
But I did try to look and I couldn't find anything really specific about it. I'm sure it was just a little, little snack bar for employees.
I think I've gone through all of the questions. Are there any other questions for Chris while we have him? Just go ahead and type in your question. All right, I think we're done. Well, I want to say thank you very much. That's very interesting. Where can we find this book?
It's obviously online, but I think they have it at Regulator on 9th Street.
Yes.
I know they'll have it there, and that's otherwise you can get it from the publisher Street Press if you go there too. So
yes. Tom wants to know if he can get his book signed. How can people hook up with you if they want you to sign their book?
Well, hopefully I'll have a book signing. I mean, we'd had it scheduled at Regulator last April, but unfortunately everything shut down and that was canceled. So hopefully we can start doing that soon this summer, have events where we can do something in conjunction with the restaurant, maybe just for fun, and have some books and snacks or something. So we talked about that last year, doing some events. It just obviously didn't happen. So so if it does, I will get the word out there and do something.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for doing this with us. People are thanking you. They said this was a lot of fun. Remember, everyone, he only went through maybe a quarter, if that, of the restaurants. There are a lot more in here, a lot more pictures. And check out his other books that he has out there. I want to thank you.
Eat at a local restaurant because they need your support.
Yes, for all the restaurants that are still around, please go support the restaurants and go eat at them. I went to Chicken Hut last month, so I got to find some more. But thank you, Carol. Carol said it was a great book.
Thanks.
So until next time, I want to thank you. Remember, keep in mind that we are having our historic Maplewood cemeteries to learn about Durham's history by taking a nice walk on the weekends through the cemetery. It's a very beautiful, architecturally significant cemetery. It has beautiful architectural tombstones and great stories. So check out our website or check out our social media and find the link to register. We have to limit the amount of people. So this is why we're not doing a big group for the spring and the fall like we usually do. But now we're trying to do it about every weekend whenever we can find volunteers. If you want to volunteer to be a Saturday tour guide, we still do our downtown tours every Saturday, and every Saturday is a different topic. First Saturday is always Bike Saturday, so that's the bike tour. But if you would like to join a tour, sign up, go to our website or social media to figure out how to sign up. Or if you want to be a tour guide, let me know. We are constantly adding people who want to be a guide. Is there anything else I'm missing, Tom? I think that's it. Maplewood tours. All right. And then in May, next month, we will have another People Plus Place series with Dr. I'm so sorry, I can't remember how to pronounce her name, but her first name is Erica from Columbia University. And then we will also have a guest speaker in June talking about a a project. I think they want to do the unveiling in June, so I won't talk about it now, but talking about a great economic development project that will kind of bring back to life the historic area. So I hope you have a great lunch, and thank you for all for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. Thank you.